What if the most reliable, verified cybersecurity advice in Latin America right now wasn't coming from, billion-dollar tech firms in glass towers?
Right, or like official government agencies.
Exactly. What if the only person actually telling you the truth is a lone, highly sarcastic hacker broadcasting from a basement in Uruguay, and he's using, like, 1960s Batman comic book sound effects to expose national crises?
It sounds completely made up, but it is entirely real.
It's wild. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We are looking at this fascinating, honestly, almost surreal media ecosystem called the Cybermidnight Club.
Run by Alberto Daniel Hill.
Right, the guy they call the Cassandra of Montevideo. So our mission today is to really explore this source material. We've got a massive stack of intelligence dossiers, predictive analytics reports, podcast transcripts, and even screenshots of these animated comic book style exposés from mid-2026.
And we're going to use all of that to understand how Hill uses this concept he calls radical transparency.
Yeah, radical transparency combined with just mind-blowing forensic accuracy and this hilarious, ironic aesthetic, which he uses to challenge these failing institutions on a global scale.
But before we jump into all that, we should probably do a quick disclaimer.
Oh yeah, definitely. Important to note, our sources detail some massive government infrastructure failures across Argentina, Uruguay, and Mexico. And, they feature some pretty politically charged commentary from both state actors and the hackers themselves.
Right. But this deep dive is entirely neutral. We are not taking any sides here.
Exactly. We are simply unpacking the narrative and the empirical data presented in the source material. We are not endorsing any political viewpoint, left, right, or center. We're just looking at the facts.
Just the facts.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand a guy who is broadcasting forensic cyber intelligence using, literal cartoon sound effects, we really need to look at where he came from.
Yeah, his origin story is critical here. If you want to understand his specific methods today, you have to look back. And according to the biographical data in the dossiers, his trajectory reads less like a standard tech resume and much more like the crucible of a vigilante narrative.
Like a comic book.
Literally. Because before he adopted this whole persona of the digital dissident, we are looking at a highly credentialed professional. I mean, he was a computer forensic examiner who had actually worked with Interpol.
Wow.
Yeah. He holds a master's degree in digital currencies. He had all the certifications, the pedigree, the institutional trust. He was on the inside.
Right, he was part of the system.
Exactly. But the turning point, the fundamental shift in his worldview, happened in 2014 in Uruguay. He engaged in what the industry refers to as an ethical vulnerability disclosure.
Which, just for those following the industry, that's supposed to be the standard operating procedure, right? You find a flaw in a system, you quietly report it to the vendor or the institution so they can patch it before the malicious actors find it.
Yeah, you act as the immune system for the network. It relies on a mutual understanding of technical reality.
But I'm guessing that's not what happened here?
No, not at all. When Hill reported this vulnerability, the response from the institutions was not to patch the system and, thank the researcher. The response was punitive. In 2014, he actually became the first person in Uruguay to be wrongfully imprisoned for a computer-related crime.
Wait, they threw him in jail for trying to help?
They did. And the psychological profiles in our source material, they describe this event as the catalyst for what they term post-traumatic growth. He experienced this massive systemic betrayal. The state and the institutional apparatus basically demonstrated that they would rather weaponize the legal system against a researcher than admit they had a technical failing.
That is just, that realization is what birthed his core operating philosophy, right? Yeah. Radical transparency.
Exactly.
So the takeaway from his perspective is that the polite, responsible disclosure model is essentially a trap.
A complete trap.
If you whisper a vulnerability to a massive corporation or a government agency, they realize that admitting the flaw damages their reputation. And because the general public lacks, deep technical literacy, these institutions can just spin the narrative, bury the vulnerability.
And they're the messenger.
Exactly. So basically, it's like a superhero origin story, but instead of falling into a vat of toxic waste, he fell into a toxic judicial system.
That is a perfect way to put it. The dossiers highlight that after this, he abandoned the cooperative model entirely. No more signing non-disclosure agreements. Hill's framework argues that institutions use opacity as a shield.
Right.
So if you broadcast the vulnerability with undeniable, cryptographically verified proof straight to the public, the institution loses the ability to control the narrative. They are forced to act.
He went from being a silent partner to acting as I think the analysts called it a psychological CERT.
Yeah, a computer emergency response team, but for the general public.
Okay, I can completely see how spending time in a toxic judicial system for trying to do the right thing would alter your approach. But let me push back here for a second.
Here.
If we're looking at this objectively, doesn't that history make him a highly biased observer? I mean, if his entire platform was born out of this profound grievance with the state, how do we know he isn't simply looking for failures just to validate his own anger?
That is a completely fair question. And the intelligence analysts tracking his ecosystem raised that exact point in the dossiers. However, the data actually validates his methodology.
Really?
Yeah. The predictive analytics reports show that he isn't just, offering cynical commentary on a podcast. He is operating a highly sophisticated intelligence gathering operation called the Predictor Protocol.
The Predictor Protocol. Sounds very sci-fi.
It does, but the metrics from his mid-2026 dashboards are empirically validated. We are talking about an 85 to 100% forecasting precision for major cyber events in the region.
Wait, up to 100%.
Yes. He earned the designation of a zero-error watchdog. And he didn't get that through political rhetoric. He got it through raw forensic accuracy.
I mean, that level of forecasting precision is what you would expect from a nation-state intelligence agency, not an independent researcher in a basement. How does the Predictor Protocol actually function? Because he clearly isn't just sitting around waiting for official press releases.
No, not at all. The underlying mechanism relies heavily on asymmetry. So think about traditional commercial threat intelligence firms. They operate on a reactionary model, right?
Right. A breach happens, then they show up.
Exactly. They deploy incident response teams after the fact, negotiate NDAs, do the forensic triage, and eventually, weeks or months later, they release this highly sanitized, legally vetted report.
Which doesn't help anyone in the moment.
Right. Hill's approach bypasses those corporate and state filters entirely by going straight to the source of the threat. The dossiers detail how he monitors live underground audio communications.
Like what kind of communication?
He spends a lot of time in encrypted X spaces and these specialized Mexican underground audio rooms. There's one specifically mentioned called Bombitas del Gobierno.
Which translates to government bombs.
Exactly.
So he is literally sitting in the digital rooms where the threat actors, the initial access brokers, the syndicates, they're all hanging out and coordinating. He's listening to the raw, unfiltered chatter before the attacks even make the evening news.
He is intercepting them in real time, but here's the critical part. Audio chatter alone is just rumor. People brag online all the time.
Right. Anyone can say they hacked a bank.
Exactly. So Hill takes the claims made by these threat actors
Right.
and he cross-references them with raw dark web telemetry. So say a threat actor in an X space claims they have a foothold in a specific government ministry. Hill immediately starts analyzing passive DNS data.
Okay.
He looks at Shodan's scans for newly exposed ports on that ministry's autonomous system number. He tracks the movement of specific data structures on hacker forums like Exploit or XSS. He correlates the human intelligence directly with the technical indicators.
Oh, wow. So it's this wild synthesis of behavioral monitoring and hard, undeniable network forensics. And because he operates outside the institutional bureaucracy, he doesn't have to get a lawyer's approval to say something. He can issue warnings instantly.
Instantly, which is why his accuracy is so high.
Which actually brings up something that genuinely surprised me in the source material. You have this highly technical forensic expert operating out of Montevideo, dealing almost exclusively with Latin American infrastructure. Logically, you would assume his audience is just this niche group of local IT professionals.
You would think so.
But the global reach analytics from his 2026 dashboard tell a completely different story. It's massive.
It really is. The geographical distribution of his audience is honestly one of the most fascinating data points in this entire stack. By mid-2026, the Cybermidnight Club ecosystem was generating over 150,000 total podcast streams.
That's huge for a niched cyber topic.
And pulling in over 37,000 daily impressions on X. But here's the crazy part. The demographic breakdown shows that 52.6% of his audience is actually located in the United States.
Over half.
Yes. And he also commands these really strong followings in the UK, Canada, and Germany, while still keeping his core authoritative audience in Latin America, specifically Uruguay, Mexico, and Argentina.
So how does a guy doing deep dive forensics on Uruguayan digital identity systems capture a massive audience in the United States? I mean, it can't just be expats tuning in. There has to be something else driving that level of international engagement.
The analysts attribute this global reach to two main factors. First, the universal nature of the anxieties he's exposing. And second, the highly untraditional, entertainment-driven vehicle he uses to deliver the data.
Okay, unpack that first part, the universal anxiety.
Well, the infrastructural vulnerabilities, the institutional cover-ups, the fragility of digital identity systems, these are not phenomena isolated to the Global South.
Right, that happens everywhere.
Exactly. A listener in the United States watching a Latin American government completely fail to protect biometric data recognizes the exact same vulnerabilities in their own state and federal systems. It resonates.
It's like a mirror.
Yes. But the real driver of his global footprint is the aesthetic. Hill recognized early on that delivering dry, 40-page technical white papers filled with CVSS scores and hexadecimal logs, that's only going to reach other cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah, regular people just tune that out. It's too dense.
Exactly. So to weaponize public attention, he translates complex cryptographic proofs into high entertainment pop culture events.
And this aesthetic is where this entire deep dive goes from a standard text story to something completely surreal. I mean, holy global footprint, Batman. The sources describe his media output, specifically these animated video exposes he releases under titles like The Vigilante Archives.
Yeah, they are something else.
They're entirely saturated in this wildly sarcastic, ironic 1960s Adam West Batman vibe. We are talking about literal comic book pop art bursts covering the screen.
It's such a deliberate psychological tactic. Think about the visual contrast. The viewer is presented with a rigorous forensic breakdown of millions of stolen citizen records, or a highly detailed explanation of an exposed API key. And the data is just punctuated with bright, animated graphics screaming Papo W, Bam, Boyan, ZP.
That's hilarious.
He frames the entire regional cybersecurity landscape as what he calls the LATAM cyber circus.
It's honestly a brilliant way to communicate the absurdity of this situation. He's taking the most devastating technical failures of the modern state and treating them like Saturday morning cartoons because, according to his framework, the governments and corporations are acting like clowns.
Exactly. It completely disarms the listener.
You come for the entertainment, and you accidentally learn about public key infrastructure. And it doesn't even stop at videos and podcasts. The man produces electronic music albums.
He really does.
The sources mention records titled Greedo, Sudaka, and Pantman. He is literally turning data leaks and forensic logs into club tracks to denounce official silence.
And this multimedia assault, it serves a very specific strategic purpose. Governments and massive corporations often use technical jargon to build what Hill calls an epistemic wall.
An epistemic wall, meaning a wall of knowledge, basically.
Right. By burying the reality of a breach under layers of complex, sanitized terminology, they bore the general public into submission. The public tunes out because they don't understand the vocabulary.
Like when a company says, we experienced an unauthorized data exfiltration event instead of hackers stole all your passwords.
Exactly. Hill's use of sarcasm, electronic music, and comic book aesthetics shatters that wall completely. He converts raw data into a meme format that is easily digestible and highly shareable on social media. He turns the data into a cultural event that the state simply cannot ignore.
Okay, so let's put this whole combination, the predictor protocol and the cyber circus aesthetic, to the test. Let's look at what the source material identifies as his flagship validation, the event that really cemented his zero-error status globally.
You're talking about March 2026.
Yes, the collapse of Argentina's digital infrastructure. Hill referred to it as the digital hurricane.
The timeline of the Argentine collapse is just the perfect illustration of how his methodology functions in the wild. So, early March 2026, Hill was monitoring that Mexican underground audio room we discussed earlier, Bombitas del Gobierno.
Right.
And during one of these sessions, he actually intercepted a representative of a highly sophisticated cyber syndicate known as the Kronos Mafia, who also operate under the name Kronos Team.
And he isn't just listening, right? He's applying the predictor protocol. He takes that audio intercept, cross-references it with dark web telemetry, and on March 19th, 2026, he issues a threat intelligence flash.
He goes completely public.
Yeah, he goes public with a prediction that a massive systemic attack is imminent against Argentina's state infrastructure. And then, exactly 11 days later, on March 30, the attack executes exactly as he predicted.
And the scale of that March 30th event was staggering. The data exfiltration impacted approximately 8 million records across 28 different state agencies.
8 million records. That's a huge chunk of the population.
It was a total infrastructural bleed. We are looking at the compromise of the cabinet of ministers, the central bank, health ministries, education portals, everything. But Hill's analysis went way beyond just the raw numbers. His reports dissected the attack architecture into two distinct layers.
The sniper layer and the swarm layer.
Yes.
Break down the mechanics of those two layers, because reading the sources, this seems to represent a real evolution in how these syndicates operate today.
It definitely is an evolution. So the sniper layer encompasses the actual technical execution of the breach. This involves the quiet, precise exploitation of unpatched vulnerabilities, bypassing rudimentary network perimeters, and the actual exfiltration of the data, which was about 140 gigabytes.
Okay, so the standard hacker stuff.
Right. This layer relies on traditional cybercrime methodologies. Finding an open port, escalating privileges, dumping the databases, and moving laterally through the state's backend without triggering any alarms. And honestly, if the Cronus Mafia had stopped there, it would have been a standard, albeit massive, data theft.
But they didn't stop there. They didn't just steal the data and quietly auction it off on a dark web forum to make a quick buck. They activated the swarm layer. And the sources describe this layer as pure psychological warfare.
The swarm layer represents the weaponization of the public narrative. The syndicate utilized the stolen data to orchestrate a highly visible public spectacle designed to maximize the humiliation of the state.
Humiliation as a tactic.
Absolutely. They initiated public countdowns on social media. They hosted live X spaces to conduct victory laps while the government was scrambling. And the dossiers describe a specific tactic they employed called Caras Horribles, which translates to horrible faces.
Yes. The sources mention they used these IP-grabbing memes during the Caras Horribles rituals. How does that actually work? Because on the surface, sending a meme sounds like a joke, but it's clearly a technical exploit.
Oh, the mechanism is quite insidious. The threat actors would create a meme mocking the government's cybersecurity response. Then they'd post a link to the image in public forums, or, and this is the crazy part, send it directly to the social media accounts of the state's own Security Operations Center analysts.
The people trying to stop them.
Exactly. And when an analyst clicks the link to view the meme, their browser fetches the image from a server controlled by the hackers. That server is configured to log the incoming request. So simply by viewing the image, the analyst inadvertently transmits their IP address, their browser fingerprint, and potentially internal network routing information right back to the syndicate.
Oh, wow. So they use these memes not just to mock the defenders, but to map the personal operational security of the very people trying to hunt them down.
It's a complete psychological dominance play. They are demonstrating to the citizens that the state is not only incapable of protecting citizen data, but incapable of protecting its own security teams.
So how does the Argentine government respond to this? I mean, it's a highly public, deeply humiliating breach. Do they shut the networks down? Do they issue emergency broadcasts to warn people?
Well, according to Hill's framework, the Argentine government deployed a classic institutional defense mechanism. They constructed an epistemic wall.
There's that term again.
Instead of acknowledging the severity of the infrastructure failure, the state apparatus actively dismissed independent researchers. They labeled experts from the global south, including Alberto Daniel Hill, as dangerous alarmists.
So they basically said, don't listen to that guy, everything is fine.
Exactly. The primary objective shifted entirely from securing the network to securing the political narrative.
They prioritize public optics over citizen safety. They just want to maintain the illusion of control, even as 8 million citizen records are being passed around underground forums. But the sequence of events reaches absolute peak irony a couple of months later.
In May.
Yeah, May 2026. The Argentine federal police execute a series of high-profile raids. They hold these massive press conferences claiming total victory, stating that they have completely dismantled the hackers responsible for the digital hurricane.
The state attempts to finalize the narrative by declaring the threat eliminated. But the Cronus Mafia responds in a way that completely undermines the state's authority. And it perfectly validates Hill's position in the ecosystem.
What do?
The supreme leadership of the syndicate decides to issue a response. But they do not contact traditional media outlets like the New York Times, and they do not issue a statement on their own dark web leak site.
No. They record a heavily encrypted voice note, and they send it directly to Alberto Daniel Hill. The cyber cartel completely bypasses the media and the state apparatus, choosing a sarcastic hacker in Uruguay as their official conduit. It's wild.
The syndicate recognized that Hill's commitment to radical transparency made him the most credible meta-analyst in the region. They knew the state would spin the narrative. They knew traditional media might lack the technical context to actually verify the claims.
But Hill would just publish the raw data.
Exactly. They used him to broadcast their official communique, which detailed their ongoing operations and systematically debunked the state's claims of total victory. And Hill published the encrypted voice note impartially. He acted as a completely neutral intelligence conduit, which just further solidified his reputation as the definitive source of truth in the LATAM cyber circus.
So the criminals actually respected his transparency more than the government's official channels.
We really did.
Which leads us to a crucial concept in the source material. Hill argues that the Argentine government's denial, the construction of this epistemic wall, isn't an anomaly. It's not just a bug in the system. It is a deeply entrenched feature of how institutions operate globally. He calls it the protocol of silence.
The protocol of silence is the theoretical bedrock of his entire crusade. Hill defines it as an automatic institutional reflex.
A reflex, like they can't help it.
Right. When a critical breach occurs, the immediate reaction of the authority, whether it is a sovereign state or a massive corporate entity, is to prioritize legal triage, semantic wordplay, and narrative control over the physical or financial safety of the impacted individuals.
Wow.
The social contract is temporarily suspended in favor of reputation management.
So instead of a company immediately notifying you saying, hey, your biometric data has been compromised, you need to take these specific defensive actions right now, they release a statement saying, we have detected an unauthorized access anomaly on legacy systems, but there is currently no evidence of widespread impact.
Exactly. They use jargon to minimize the perceived threat.
And the sources provide a chilling example of this happening in the corporate sector in Mexico, right around the exact same time as the Argentine collapse, April 2026. The B Prime breach, which Hill covered under the title Cazador Cazado, the Hunter Hunted.
The B Prime incident is fascinating. It perfectly illustrates the dangers of the protocol of silence when it's applied to the private sector. B Prime was a premier cybersecurity and digital transformation firm headquartered in Monterrey.
They were the experts.
Right. They were contracted to protect the digital infrastructure of massive multinational corporate clients. We are looking at a client roster that included companies like Iberdrola, Alusa, and Whirlpool.
These are huge companies that handle the personal and financial data of millions of people. You hire a firm like B Prime because you expect them to be the apex predators of network defense, and they got hacked.
They did.
But they weren't brought down by some sophisticated nation-state zero-day exploit, right? The vector of attack was shockingly rudimentary.
It was incredibly basic. The forensic reports indicate that a threat actor operating under the alias Dylan Murley breached B Prime because the cybersecurity firm failed to implement basic multi-factor authentication MFA on their own administrative accounts.
Wait, no two-factor authentication? Are you kidding?
No MFA.
It's an unfathomable oversight. It's not just a bank vault secured by a screen door. It's like a master locksmith company, the very people you hired to design the security for Fort Knox, leaving their global database of master key code combinations sitting on an unprotected public web server. By failing to use MFA, B Prime essentially handed the attacker the keys to the kingdom.
And the fallout from that single failure was catastrophic. Because they lacked MFA, the attacker gained access to B Prime's Cisco Meraki API keys.
Okay, explain the significance of the Cisco Meraki API keys to the listener, because this goes far beyond just stealing an email database.
It's much worse. Cisco Meraki is a cloud-managed IT routing architecture. The API keys act as the master control plane for the entire software-defined network. With those keys, an attacker doesn't just have read access to data. They have operational control over the physical network infrastructure itself. They can reroute traffic, disable firewalls, manipulate video surveillance feeds, and push malicious firmware updates to thousands of network devices across multiple corporate clients simultaneously.
That is terrifying.
And the breach resulted in the exposure of 53 gigabytes of highly sensitive internal corporate data.
And the most damaging part of that 53 gigabyte leak was the exposure of B Prime's highly confidential client penetration test reports.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, these are the documents where B Prime details exactly where their clients are vulnerable. The attacker essentially stole the architectural blueprints detailing exactly how to hack massive multinational corporations.
They handed the attackers a roadmap.
Exactly. So when this catastrophic failure occurs, how does B Prime react? They deploy the protocol of silence.
Of course they do. They attempted to downplay the severity of the API key exposure and minimize the scope of the breach in their public statements. But the institutional reflex went even further this time. B Prime actively began threatening independent security researchers and journalists who were reporting on the leaked penetration reports with defamation lawsuits.
You're joking.
No. They attempt to weaponize the legal system to enforce the silence and suppress the technical reality of their failure.
They tried to sue the people pointing out the fire instead of putting the fire out. That is unbelievable. But this is where Hill's concept of radical transparency becomes an offensive weapon.
The sources call his response the asymmetric counteroffensive.
Right. He didn't just tweet a complaint about the lawsuits. He mobilized a massive international response.
Hill understood that fighting a massive corporation in court on a defamation charge is a losing battle for an independent researcher. They have infinite money. So he shifted the battlefield entirely. He drafted public open letters demanding immediate client notifications. He published live, unassailable cryptographic evidence of the breached API keys and the penetration reports, making the reality of the hack completely undeniable.
He forced it into the lights.
And more importantly, he mobilized major international digital rights organizations. He brought in the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Amnesty International to shine a global spotlight on B Prime's attempt to censor security researchers.
Wow. The sheer pressure of that transparency campaign, combined with the undeniable forensic proof, it forced the corporation to back down entirely. He turned their strategy of corporate intimidation into a massive public relations disaster. Seriously. But if you think a cybersecurity firm failing to use passwords and then suing journalists is the pinnacle of the LATAM cyber circus, we have to examine the case of BCA Ltd, Birmingham Cyber Arms. This is where the ecosystem transitions from institutional incompetence to literal manufactured extortion.
The BCA Ltd dossier forces us to confront a highly insidious secondary threat vector within the cybersecurity landscape. What happens when the threat environment is actively manipulated by the very entities selling the protection?
So dark.
Hill's investigation into BCA Ltd unmasked an operation that systematically manufactured a false flag cyber panic in Uruguay.
It's the ultimate protection racket. I mean, it's like a glazier, a window repair company, driving through a neighborhood in the middle of the night, throwing bricks through the windows of local businesses just so they can show up the next morning handing out business cards to fix the glass.
Yeah, that is exactly what it is.
How did this operation actually function? Who was behind throwing the bricks?
The operation was orchestrated by an individual named Mauro Caceres, who operated under the alias Eldritch, and he ran Birmingham Cyber Arms. According to Hill's exhaustive 35-page cryptographic counter dossier, Eldritch engineered what analysts refer to as a create, report, amplify, sell metadata cycle.
Break down the mechanics of that cycle for us. How do you manufacture a national cyber panic without actually hacking anything?
Well, the first step is creation. BCA Ltd would generate synthetic threat indicators. This might involve creating fake chatter on obscure dark web forums or packaging publicly available, totally benign data and relabeling it as a critical new leak from a major Uruguayan corporation.
So just making up a threat.
Right. The second step is reporting. They take this fabricated metadata and they feed it directly to mainstream journalists and news outlets.
And because mainstream newsrooms often lack the deep technical literacy to forensically verify dark web data dumps, they act as uncritical megaphones. They publish the story, citing dark web intelligence, and suddenly the artificial threat becomes a mainstream news headline.
And that leads directly to the amplification phase. The public, and more importantly, corporate boards of directors, read these headlines and plunge into an artificial panic. The perceived threat level spikes across the country.
They're terrified.
And once the environment is sufficiently terrified, BCA Ltd executes the final step, the sell. They aggressively market their proprietary threat intelligence monitoring platform, which they called Sheriff, to these panicked enterprises.
And they were selling subscriptions to this Sheriff platform for $29,000 a year.
$29,000.
It's extortion disguised as enterprise security. They create the fear, and then they sell the cure. And it worked perfectly until Alberto Daniel Hill intercepted the metadata.
Right. Hill applied the predictor protocol in reverse here. Instead of predicting an attack, he forensically deconstructed a phantom one. His 35-page dossier meticulously proved that the data leaks touted by BCA Ltd were completely fabricated or recycled. He exposed the synthetic nature of the dark web chatter and traced the amplification cycle right back to Eldritch.
He injected the real forensic truth into the ecosystem to debunk the manufactured threat. It's a brilliant demonstration of why independent asymmetric verification is so essential right now. Private intelligence firms often have a massive financial incentive to monetize fear and inflate the threat landscape. Hill's radical transparency is literally the only counterweight to that dynamic.
It's the only thing keeping them honest.
Exactly. Okay, so we've seen him take on the Cronus Mafia in Argentina, and we've seen him expose corporate grifters and false flags in Mexico and Uruguay. But the source material indicates that Hill's sarcastic comic book crusade reaches its absolute peak back in his home country, in an event he explicitly dubbed the ultimate hack.
We are looking at the Turid and Lepampa saga of May 2026. If the previous events were skirmishes, this represents a fundamental crisis of national digital sovereignty.
Walk us through what TUID actually is.
TUID is Uruguay's high-assurance national digital identity platform. It is the centralized system used to legally verify the identity of citizens online.
We are talking about the foundational layer of digital governance. This is the system that holds the biometric data and the cryptographic keys that allow citizens to sign legally binding contracts, access their bank accounts, and interact with the state.
It is the keys to everything.
And in May 2026, a syndicate known as LATAM breached it. They exfiltrated 8 gigabytes of highly sensitive data.
And the composition of that 8 gigabytes is what made the breach catastrophic. The exfiltrated data included back-end API credentials and the biometric validation frameworks. To understand the gravity of this, exposing the back-end API keys of a national identity system is akin to handing an attacker the master cryptographic signing keys to the state's logic core.
It fundamentally compromises the integrity of every single digital signature generated by the system.
Yes.
So, facing the total compromise of the National Digital Identity Framework, how does the Uruguayan state respond? They deploy the protocol of silence, but this time they add a distinctly theatrical twist, the scapegoat.
Oh, this part is amazing.
The government orchestrates a press conference and blames the entire massive structural failure of the TUID system on a single 18-year-old kid named Vladdy. They arrest him, declare total victory over the cyber threat, and assure the public that the system is entirely secure.
It is a textbook application of narrative control over technical reality. They just needed a face to show the public. But Hill, utilizing the predictor protocol to monitor the actual syndicate behind Lepampa leaks on Telegram and dark web forums, highlights a bizarre and tragic irony playing out in real time.
What were the actual hackers doing?
Well, while the state is declaring victory, the actual cybercriminals are laughing at the government's response.
The sources quote Hill's interviews, where he points out that the syndicate members were in these forums giving the next generation of hackers better operational security advice than the state was giving its own citizens.
It's true.
The hackers are literally posting messages saying, hey kids, if you're going to do this, make sure you use a no-logs VPN, route your traffic through secure nodes, and whatever you do, don't do it for media fame or you'll end up being the scapegoat like Vladdy.
The criminal cartels are advocating for stronger encryption protocols than the national infrastructure is utilizing.
The irony is just profound. But Hill's analysis quickly shifted to the underlying technical crisis, which he identified as the security gap. The arrest of the scapegoat did not alter the reality that the API keys and digital certificates were still in the wind. The critical failure of the state was that even after the breach was public, they failed to immediately revoke the compromised digital certificates.
And that is a massive, massive failure.
Explain the mechanics of certificate revocation for us, because Hill referred to this specific failure as a strategic gamble on the attacker's honesty. Why is failing to revoke a certificate so dangerous?
So in public key infrastructure, or PKI, a digital certificate is mathematically valid until it either expires or is explicitly placed on a certificate revocation list, a CRL.
Okay, so a list of bad keys.
Right. And many offline systems, asynchronous processing queues, and third-party vendors rely on cached versions of these lists. If the state delays updating the CRL, say, to avoid the logistical nightmare and public embarrassment of forcing every single citizen to re-authenticate their identity, the compromised certificates remain technically viable.
Which leaves the entire national system wide open to what analysts call pre-validation fraud.
Exactly. Because the certificate appears mathematically valid and unrevoked to the back-end validators, an attacker holding the stolen keys can forge legally binding digital signatures.
Oh, man.
They can authorize massive financial transfers or sign binding contracts, and the system will accept the transaction as legitimate because the cryptographic math checks out. The state artificially extended the vulnerability window just by prioritizing optics over security.
which sets the stage for the absolute cinematic climax of this entire deep dive. August 2026. Despite all of Hill's forensic warnings, despite the undeniable reality that the digital certificates are actively bleeding out into the dark web, the Uruguayan government decides to push forward with a massive, highly publicized launch of their new national digital wallet, the Billetera Digital.
This event represents the ultimate convergence of Hill's predictive analytics, his multimedia aesthetic, and the catastrophic reality of the protocol of silence. It all comes together right here.
Hill launches a fictionalized, highly sarcastic 8-episode podcast miniseries, specifically tracking this launch. He literally titles it Holy Protocol of Silence Batman, Uruguay's Digital Cell Phone, and he proceeds to narrate the collapse of the national infrastructure live on the internet. The scene described in the sources is almost unbelievable. It's launch day. The president of Uruguay is standing at a podium delivering a sweeping speech about leaping into the future of digital sovereignty. There are literal fireworks going off over the Capitol.
And simultaneously, while the physical fireworks are detonating in the sky, Alberto Daniel Hill is sitting in an encrypted X space with thousands of global listeners monitoring the raw network telemetry.
While the president is speaking, Hill is watching attackers on the dark web execute a massive, coordinated strike. The hackers are utilizing 184,000 stolen business records that were acquired from a completely separate breach involving a database called guiempresas.com.i.
And the synthesis of these two breaches is what caused the collapse.
How did they combine them?
The attackers leveraged the detailed business records from Geographic, which contained comprehensive purchase histories, vendor details, and internal support tickets. They combined this deeply personalized data with the compromised TUID certificates to launch hyper-realistic business email compromise attacks on an industrial scale.
So they were forging authorized payment requests.
Yes, and these requests bypassed security filters entirely because they were mathematically signed with valid, unrevoked state certificates.
The outcome is devastating. Citizens, excited by the presidential speech and the fireworks, they download the new Sovereign Digital Wallet app. They log in using their compromised TUID credentials, and what do they see?
Nothing.
The accounts have been drained. Balances are sitting at zero. Or in some absolutely surreal, absurd cases caused by the back-end architecture collapsing under the weight of the pre-validation fraud, citizens log in to find their life savings displayed in Venezuelan bolivars.
It's insane. The entire foundational system is fundamentally broken.
The state's architecture collapsed exactly as the predictor protocol had forecast months prior, and the government's response to this undeniable cascading failure.
They initiate what Hill calls a Level 3 protocol of silence.
A Level 3.
The government goes into immediate, absolute damage control. They apply pressure to censor domestic media coverage, and the official explanation they feed to the panicked public is that the app is simply experiencing a small visual bug due to high demand.
A visual bug.
They issue statements assuring the citizens, your money is completely safe. Please be patient while the servers scale.
Well, they're issuing those assurances. The virtual vaults are already emptied. The institutional source was complete. Hill's use of 1960s Batman comic graphics had never been more appropriate. It was a literal KPW moment for national sovereignty.
That really was.
So, what does this all mean for you? The listener sitting at home, maybe checking your own banking app or digital wallet right now. Hill's entire crusade, the sarcastic electronic music, the comic book sound effects, the late nights intercepting hacker audio, it's all designed to highlight one terrifying truth.
Which is?
According to Hill's framework, the biggest threat to your data, your identity, and your financial security isn't necessarily the dark web or the Cronus Mafia or some shadowy cyber syndicate. Often the most profound threat is the kindergarten-level digital hygiene and the deliberate protective opacity of the very institutions that are sworn to protect you.
The source material drives home a critical reality here. In an era of absolute information overload, where corporate PR spin and state-sponsored narrative control dominate the news cycle, independent, empirically verified watchdogs are becoming essential infrastructure.
They are the only ones telling the truth.
When a sovereign state or a massive corporation builds an epistemic wall to hide their failures, a digital dissident armed with radical transparency and unassailable cryptographic proof is required to tear it down. Asymmetry, operating outside the institutional bureaucracy, is rapidly becoming our only viable line of defense.
Which leaves us with a final, incredibly provocative thought to ponder. Throughout his coverage of the Argentine and Uruguayan collapses, Hill issued scathing critiques of a new government initiative being proposed, called the social digital twin.
Yeah, that project. The concept is that the state wants to create comprehensive, centralized, algorithmic representations of every citizen in order to optimize governance and public services.
A complete algorithmic mirror. A system that aggregates your behaviors, your financial transactions, your healthcare records, and your physical movements into a single, unified digital profile managed by the state.
It sounds convenient until you remember who is building it.
Exactly. So here is the question you need to mull over today. If sovereign states are currently incapable of defending basic, static ID records from rudimentary attacks, if they lack basic multi-factor authentication on critical nodes, if they refuse to update certificate revocation lists just to save face, and if their institutional reflex is to actively legally lie to you and their networks fail, what happens when these same governments succeed in building complex, centralized algorithmic representations of our entire lives?
It's a terrifying thought.
When your entire digital existence is mirrored in a massive database run by institutions that rely on a protocol of silence who is actually in control of your identity, suddenly trusting the lone, sarcastic hacker broadcasting from a basement doesn't seem so bizarre after all. It turns out, when the institutional waters are this murky and the official channels are feeding you semantic spin, you might just need a guy with a comic book aesthetic to show you where the system is broken.